Greetings to all viewers of the Open Studio. My name is Serge Dukhanov, and today it is my honor and pleasure to greet Mr. Paul Craig Roberts, Chairman of the Institute for Political Economy. In the Reagan administration, Mr. Roberts served as Assistant Secretary of the Treasury for Economic Policy. Mr. Roberts' journalistic career includes posts of associate editor and columnist for the Wall Street Journal and for Businessweek. In 1992, he received the Warren Brooks Award for Excellence in Journalism. In 1993, the Forbes Media Guide recognized him as one of the top 7 journalists in the United States. In 2015, the Press Club of Mexico awarded him with the International Journalism Award. Dr. Roberts is one of the most respected columnists in the alternative media. His syndicated articles can be read on many leading alternative news websites, including Lou Rockwell, InfoWars, Counterpunch, Information Clearinghouse, and many others. Good day and welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, the Putin-Biden meeting is finally over. The presidents have had their separate press conferences, clearly underscoring the existing differences. Unexpected for many, one of the main outcomes of the summit has become the US-Russia presidential joint statement on strategic stability. According to old diplomatic tradition, a summit without a joint statement or a communique or a joint press conference should officially be considered a failure. So, the joint statement is there. It includes such phrases as able to make progress, our shared goals of ensuring predictability in the strategic sphere, reducing risk of armed conflict and the threat of nuclear war, commitment to nuclear arms control, and even we reaffirm the principle that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. But do these words mean what they say? Was the summit a success? What is your opinion on that?
Well, first of all, I do think that both leaders agree with those words. I don't think either Washington or Kremlin favor a nuclear war. So they do agree on that, and the world should be thankful. Now, the question is there agreement that nuclear war is not desirable, sufficient to prevent it? And is there progress from this summit that would guarantee that a nuclear war can't happen? That's the question. It seems to me that real progress in the relationship between Russia and the United States is blocked as long as Washington has hegemonic intent. As long as Washington intends to be the main decider of events, it has to see Russia and China as powers that are in Washington's way. And so, as long as Washington has that attitude, that is, as long as Washington is hostile to a multipolar world, it's hard to see real progress in improving the relations. It's also a fact that Washington needs Russia as an enemy, not as a friend, because Washington uses the Russian threat to justify its massive defense budget or its massive military security complex budget. This is an enormous amount of money. There are many other needs in the United States that need this money. So to reserve it for the military security complex, there has to be a good reason. And so the Russian threat is the reason. The Russian threat is also important in order to hold on to NATO. And NATO is important to Washington because it is through NATO that Washington controls the European foreign policy. So, given Washington's needs for a Russian threat, and given Washington's hegemonic intent, how do you have good relations? That is the question that was not addressed at the summit and was not resolved. In other words, we can have more hope the day Washington says, hey, we realize that Russia and China have their own interests and that we all have to put our interest in some sort of a common framework in which we accept each other's interests. But Washington hasn't done that.
Mm-hmm.
And then Washington needs to say, okay, NATO, that's a Cold War relic. We don't need hundreds of military bases abroad. That era is over. Now, that's what Trump tried to do.
Yes.
And he wasn't permitted. So whether or not Biden or any other president in the future will be able to do that, not unless the military security complex is willing
Mm-hmm.
or is weakened. So this is the realistic element about the summit and about the state of relations. We can hope that some good comes from the meeting. We're told that the ambassadors will be restored.
Mm-hmm.
But so what? When the ambassadors were restored, it didn't make any difference. So I don't share some of the optimism that we see in the media. Of course, Biden and Putin, being politicians in democracies, have to put a positive face.
Mm-hmm.
Neither one of them wants to say, oh, it was a failure, because that reflects on them.
Mm-hmm.
So we should be aware that public statements are often political.
Yes.
And the underlying reality is that the United States still regards itself as a hegemonic power. And the United States needs an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And that Russia provides the enemy.
Sir, having watched the press conferences of the both presidents, I have to give credit to Biden and admit that notwithstanding his long voyage, he looked rather dynamic and, to agree, upbeat. Putin, on the other hand, seemed to me a bit tired and as if he was under some kind of stress. Do you think this might be an indication that there was a winner in this encounter?
Well, I think that Biden came up with a new way of causing propaganda
Mm-hmm.
against Putin and Russia when he said that it would be terrible for Russia for Navalny to die in prison. this was sort of an insinuation against Putin, because that set the stage for the American journalist when Putin agreed to take questions from all press present after the conference. And he was asked by a reporter from ABC, why did he fear political opposition so much that he poisoned them and put them in prison? Well, he gave some answer, and the journalist said, you didn't answer my question. What is it you're afraid of? Why don't you permit political opposition? Something along those lines. Well, the people in the world didn't witness the meeting between the two leaders. They only see the press conference.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do they take away? They take away from the press conference that the reporters are accusing Putin of poisoning and imprisoning his opponents. And so it confirms the image of Putin as a dictator that eliminates his opponents. So in that sense, the propaganda trap that I spoke about prior to the conference operated, and it worked. And Biden set it up so the media could launch it. And so the media did it. So, maybe Putin was realizing that being open and willing to take questions from everybody, whereas Biden would only take, I think, questions from the American journalist. Maybe Putin realized that, hey, being open is not working for Russia. It's working against us because now they can set me up in the press meetings. I think that that could explain why he looked a little bit downbeat there.
Mm-hmm. One author, a journalist from Australia, Caitlin Johnstone, named that press conference sycophant. Sir, currently the Russian press and the Russian experts are asking questions if any agreements will now be possible between our two respective countries. What would you say to them?
No, for the reasons I already gave. Russia is seen as a constraint on American unilateralism. So from Washington's standpoint, the existence of an independent Russia is a problem. Not Russia doing allegedly cybersecurity attacks, not allegedly interfering in elections, not allegedly invading countries, but just Russia's existence as a powerful country is a constraint on Washington's unilateral actions. And Washington doesn't like that. And so from Washington's standpoint, the way you fix the problem is that Russia accepts Washington's unilateralism. But of course, Russia can't do that and be an independent country. So that's one reason there can't really be any progress. American hegemony is in the way. The Americans have to abandon the enemy in order for there to be progress. And they have to give up on using a Russian threat to justify their military budget and to justify NATO and their control over Europe. Well, if Washington is an empire and the Western Europeans are part of it, Washington has to be willing to give up its empire and doesn't show that inclination. I think Trump had that inclination, but again, he was not permitted. And so there's no reason to believe Biden would be permitted. Moreover, Biden hasn't got that intention. He's not Trump.
Yes. Sir, which of the presidents was more open to the press? What do you think?
Oh, well, Putin, of course. Putin opened his press conference to all the press and thereby exposed himself to the Americans. Biden did not open himself to all the press. He excluded Russian press, as I understand it, and only had American journalists who were very much favorable to him. So Biden had a controlled press, Putin had an open press, and he paid a price. Putin paid the price. You know, we described the ABC journalist who made the point for the whole world.
And the CNN.
Yeah, and CNN, which picked it up. So Putin poisons his opponents and puts them in jail. And that, I think, is what the world took away from the summit.
Was it a mistake?
Yeah. Well, I think it was a mistake. You know, if you have leaders that don't behave that way and they expect others not to behave that way, they can make mistakes. And it's all, I think sooner or later the Russians will learn it's a mistake, always a mistake for them to trust the West. It never works out for them. Now, some Americans will have noticed, hey, look, he's very open. Look, but most people won't notice that. They'll just hear, oh, he poisons people. And so it must be very discouraging for Putin and for someone like Lavrov at the quality of people in the West that they encounter. And I think it was probably also a mistake for Putin to describe Biden as a statesman. It's not the way he's viewed by Americans. You know, Biden is the one who threatened the president of Ukraine with withholding American aid unless he stopped the investigation of the firm that Biden's son was a director of. We've all seen that on television where Biden brags about suppressing the investigation in the Ukraine. Clearly, he enjoyed the power to do that. We all know about the relations of his son with various Chinese entities, because the laptop computer of his son fell into hands that reveal all sorts of nefarious dealings, and yet there's been no action by authorities, and yet people know about this, and so they feel again it's been covered up to protect Biden, and Biden doesn't do anything about it. So I don't think it helped for Putin to declare somebody a statesman who's not regarded as one by his own people.
From what you say, I would state that the Kremlin should think more what reciprocity means.
Yeah.
Also, we all know that politicians lie, but I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry when I heard Biden say, and I quote, "Let's get this straight. How would it be if the United States were viewed by the rest of the world as interfering in the elections directly of other countries, and everybody knew it? What would it be like if we engaged in activities that he meant Putin, is engaged in? It diminishes the standing of a country that is desperately trying to make sure it maintains its standing as a major world power." Sir, how would you comment that?
Well, that wouldn't play well in the numerous countries that have experienced Washington's interference in their elections. You know, all over Latin America, Washington interferes in the elections, even to the extent of overthrowing democratically elected governments of which it disapproves. You know, Obama overthrew the government in Honduras, I think, in 2009, because it was a reformist government and it was seen to threaten American commercial interests by putting resources in the hands of Hondurans instead of Americans or the New York banks. And we've seen the pressures on Venezuela. We saw Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina, Brazil. It's an enormous racket of interfering in elections. And of course, not just in Latin America, all over the world. Many people believe that the last two French presidents were selected by Washington. Clearly, Merkel is a Washington product. So if even major European governments have Washington's hand in their elections and in the financing, it's a very funny thing for Biden to say. And this is something I think most people are aware of. I think they are aware around the world of American interference in elections and in overthrowing regimes. I mean, you know, we have Libya overthrown, Iraq overthrown, the effort to overthrow Syria, the ongoing effort to overthrow Iran. It's just sort of an endless American occupation or Washington occupation, overthrowing governments that are seen to be in Washington's way. And of course, Washington has the same intent toward Russia, which I think explains the Maidan Revolution, which was a Washington operation against Ukraine. So I don't know. Biden wasn't thinking when he said that.
Okay. Sir, I'd like to thank you, and I hope we'll see what happens and what developments will be after that meeting, how it develops, and we'll meet again. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes.